Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about walk-ons and how they could be a thing of the past in college football. Definitely not what you want to see, but costs have to be cut, and people are not going to be very kind about it as they go about it. But let's get into NC State and Virginia. This is a very, very interesting story that I think some people might just overlook and just continue on with their day, but has a lot of implications for the future. So Virginia and NC State decided on Wednesday they were going to play a home and home. That's all well and good, but they decided to play an out-of-conference home and home, which makes it very, very interesting. And this is going to start in 2025 in North Carolina, in Raleigh, and then they'll go to Charlottesville, Virginia in 2026. This is the second time a pair of ACC rivals have set up this. Wake Forest and North Carolina did this in 2019 and 2021. They wanted to kind of keep that rivalry alive. This is probably another example of you want to play that team more often, so you try to get them on the schedule more often. So this is obviously, in part due to the divisions being scrapped from the ACC and from pretty much every conference across the country over the last little bit. It makes scheduling a little bit tougher, especially in a conference with 17 teams where you can't cut it straight down the middle and make it, divisions, or at least just make it a rotating model. It makes it a little bit harder to get all of these teams on the schedule as frequently as you would like. So definitely something that they have been pushing for. Virginia and NC State had played each other 60 times since they started in 1904, but it's diminished since 2005, and they've only played 7 times since then. So they definitely really want to play that game. They weren't scheduled to play until 2027, so decided to add in 2 more until then, and definitely a very interesting thing. Something that I think a lot of people will overlook and say, whatever, they can do what they want. But there are a couple things happening here that not only affect Virginia and NC State, but affect everyone. And one that is just as common sense as it gets that for some reason has not happened in college football. But one of them is something, one of them is something that has been happening for quite some time, which is a group of 5 teams are being put to the side. That's just kind of the way the world has gone with the playoff and with conference realignment and everything in between. The group of 5 teams are just getting kind of swept under the rug. They're trying to push them to the side, and it's very frustrating to me for a number of reasons. But the number one reason to me is just you don't want to lose to that team, and that's really, really frustrating. You don't want to be Texas A&M losing to App State, and you don't want to be that team that gets made fun of because you lose to a smaller team. That's ridiculous. And I get that, you want to play Virginia and Virginia wants to play NC State and you want that matchup. But you guys can play in 2027. Or you can set up something that should have been set up in college football for, 50 years now, which is uniform scheduling. I don't know why this has not been a thing for the past decade at least, but it hasn't. And it's created, tens of millions of problems for the college football and the way that we talk about college football, specifically the way that we talk about the SEC comparative to other conferences. The SEC plays 8 conference games, everyone else plays 9, and everyone else tells the SEC that they're running away from conference games when they do that. And obviously, 8 conference games in the SEC is a little bit different than 9 in the ACC, but it's crazy that they're not playing the same number of conference games. I'm not saying that the SEC is, doing anything wrong by playing the number of games they are, but the reality is everyone should be playing the same number of conference games, everyone should be playing the same number of out-of-conference major games, and everyone should be playing the same number of FCS teams, which is 0. So I'll break down a couple of the ideas that I have here, and it's a lot of the ideas that I just talked about, where play 8 conference games a year. I'm fine with that number. I'd rather it be 9 if I'm being totally honest with you, but if 8's the number, that's all well and good. I think we can all be okay with that, and that's something that should be a layup. It makes it a little bit easier with some of the scheduling stuff. Obviously, the ACC having 17 teams it makes that a little bit tougher, but there's a way to make the math work. There's no doubt in my mind. So 8 conference games a year feels like a good place to land with all of these conferences expanding and just making everything a little bit more uniform across the board. Then you have to play 2 out-of-conference games that are Power 5 teams. and they can't be in your conference. You can't just call them out of conference games because you want to. NC State could have very easily called up Indiana and gone and played in Bloomington. Virginia could have very easily called up Texas Tech and gone to Lubbock and played a game. They decided not to. And they'll tell you that they wanted to keep the rivalry alive, but I don't necessarily buy that as much as they want to sell that to you. So you have to play out of conference games. They have to be Power 5 teams because those are the games we want to see. The weird games that we haven't seen in the past. The Virginia against Texas Tech is a wild game. That are two teams that have, to my knowledge, have never played each other, at least not in the recent history, and absolutely would be a very, very interesting thing to watch. Now, is it the most fascinating two teams in the world? Probably not, but give us more of those games, and then you get the Penn States against Texas and the Michigan against Tennessee and all of these different games that would be so much fun to watch. But it starts with these type of games where if NC State and Virginia start to schedule themselves, what's stopping, Vandy from scheduling South Carolina or for an out-of-conference game? And it's a snowball that we do not want to roll down that hill, and it could be pretty catastrophic if it does. And then finally, you must play at least 2 Group of 5 teams. I think this is a layup. You want to keep those Group of 5 teams involved, but you don't want to play them every single week, and you don't want to have to necessarily go and face them all the time. So I feel like 2 a year is normal. I think you could do even 1 a year and bump up the conference games a little bit, but at the end of the day, it helps those Group of 5 teams get a little bit, on a bigger stage, maybe get a check that they very much need. A couple of things that just have to happen. No FCS teams. I'm not budging on that one. The fact that anyone plays an FCS team is ridiculous to me. You're playing 2 totally different sports, but that's beside the point. I do think that there is a solution to FCS teams losing out on the money that they do make from those games. It's something that Josh Pate on his show has brought up a number of times, which is have these teams play in the spring. You can opt in, you can opt out, that's your own business, but why doesn't Georgia play, Kennesaw State or someone around them that is an FCS team that, could use that little bit of money, but you don't necessarily need to play them in the fall. You can play them in the spring, you can have a real spring game and, frankly, probably beat up on a team and give your guys the reps that they need, but also, still give that team the little bit of money that they need and keep your schedule as intact and as tough as it possibly can be, because that's what we want as college football fans. So it's going to be one of those things that for some reason we have not come to this decision before. For some reason we've just kept kicking the can down the road and acting like we didn't need uniform scheduling across the sport, especially across the Power 5 conferences. But we absolutely do. I understand that the Big Ten and the SEC are tougher conferences. I understand that playing more conference games for them is going to be tougher than playing in the Big 12 or the ACC. But the reality is you are where you are, and you play the teams that are in front of you. And with those 2 out-of-conference Power 5 games, you can even the scales just a little bit in terms of, the schedule that you're playing and how tough it's going to be and that type of thing. So overall, when we talk about, NC State and Virginia scheduling this game, it's relatively benign, right? At this very moment, it's a relatively benign change where you're just going to see NC State play Virginia, and whoever wins, it won't affect their conference record. That's whatever. It doesn't necessarily affect you this year or when they're even playing in 25 and 26. The issue is it's slowly squeezing out the teams that make college football special, in my opinion, in the Group of 5 teams that are a little bit smaller, that go to these big universities and say they can compete with these teams. And then you lose a little bit of, the interesting nature of some of these weird out-of-conference games that we get every year. And also, I think it's just NC State and Virginia being a little bit scared to face those Group of 5 teams that could knock you off your pedestal and could make you a joke around some social media, some different things. So I think it's a number of things that are playing into this, but I don't like any of them. I'll be totally honest with you. I think it's insane to me that we have not set up a uniform scheduling model already. It's insane to me that they're allowed to do this type of thing. Because if I was the ACC, I would immediately come in the room and say, no, go call Colorado, go call Texas Tech, go call Arizona, and schedule a game that's actually out of conference. But at the end of the day, they did what they did. And if uniform scheduling was in place, they probably wouldn't have, because they wouldn't have had to wait till 2027 to play this game again. But hopefully that's something that'll get figured out. I think that's a very manageable problem. You just get the commissioners in a room, have them agree to a normal model that they all should agree to if they're not, being ridiculous, which maybe they will be, to be totally honest with you. But this sport can be, I don't want to necessarily put a number on it, but this sport can be a lot more fun than it is right now in terms of scheduling. And this is a great example of how it can be a lot more fun than NC State and Virginia playing again. So I don't like this one bit. I wish that NC State and Virginia didn't do it, but I also wish that we had uniform scheduling so they didn't even think about doing this. But that's the world we live in. Hopefully this is fixed at some point in the near future, but a very, very interesting thing that will definitely be fascinating to watch in the next couple of years. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. There are a couple of guys that have committed, including Cormani McLean. He has found his new home, but also a ton of intel on guys that are still sitting out there that some teams really, really need. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.